and welcome back to part 36 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where today, well, we need to try and get to the roof to try and get out of here now we've successfully managed to save Aerith. But, of course, it's never as easy as that, is it?
Let's go.
Right.
Hell is this place?
Hojo's treasure. Shinra's dark secret.
What I wouldn't give to burn it all down. But we need to get to the roof. What is that?
Genova.
Mother. Together, we will reclaim our world.
I'm sick of this. I'm sick of all of this! Cloud?
Tell me, is it really you?
Don't deny me. Embrace me.
A touching reunion.
Very good. And thus is the hypothesis proven correct. I can only hope you will continue not to disappoint.
Yes, Sephiroth is actually in this building. That was a direct clash we managed to get with him. He's not some illusion in the back of Cloud's head. He's an actual being that's there, that was standing before us. Standing in front of the remains of whatever that thing is, known as Genova. I was very curious to see how they were going to handle the Genova section of the game compared to the original. Because in the original, Genova basically breaks out and murders most of the HQ. With only, like, the higher-ups surviving. Like, a lot of the common folk and common soldiers are massacred. But in this one, they change it a lot. Genova still gets to escape, which we'll see, but not in the same manner and not with the same consequences. As we press on and encounter our first enemies of this entirely new area to the remake, We are currently in the Drum, an area exclusive to the remake, as I said before, and basically the final dungeon of this game, which I feel is the reason why it exists to begin with. Instead of doing the original route, they make you do this, so you have one last, like, big chunk of game where you have some puzzle solving, you have some enemies to deal with, it escalates to a boss fight. They have things going on, it's a little harder than everything else you've done. It's a final dungeon for part 1. They literally made it to, like, fit that, like, to tick that box kind of thing. And to be honest, I don't feel as strongly against it as a lot of people do, but I do understand that this area, the Drum, goes on longer than it should. The Drum kind of drags. It's not that bad. It's a perfectly fine final dungeon. It's just too long. It does take a long while. To give you an idea, we're going to be here for 2 videos before we get out. This is only part 1 of the Drum. But moving on to something that was understandable but still a little disappointing. In part 1, Red 13 is not playable. He is basically a guest character where he will do his own thing, but you can't directly control or influence his actions. He will do entirely whatever he wants. And I imagine in part 2 onwards, this will change and he'll be an entirely fleshed out playable character. But it's still a little bit like, I know it's only for this dungeon that you'd really get the players in, but it's still a little like, oh. Because if you're wondering what I'm talking about, Red 13 is a part of the original team of Final Fantasy VII. Of the original playable characters, he is the 5th member. He is the next one that joins. So I felt, and a lot of people felt, it was within reason that Red 13 would be playable, even if only for the end piece of the game. But no, because like I said, it's only for this dungeon, and then the rest of it is mostly boss fights and a lot more plot stuff before we reach the end. I guess they just, and fair enough I guess, decided that it wouldn't be worth making him playable now, and it would instead make more sense to make him playable in the next parts where he would have a lot more like game time. So, you know, he'll be there from the start instead of just only there in the last chapter or so. And the thing is, through the Integrate DLC, they've already done some of the work because Yuffie is playable in Integrate, so her setup and her gameplay style is already in motion. So they've already got who will eventually be the 6th party member in place, leaving only 3 more after that. I'm curious to see how many of those 3 more actually make it into the next part. I'm very curious. It entirely depends on how far they go. So some people fear that they will stop at Junon, like the next kind of big city, even though it's not as big as Midgar. And if that's the case, we won't see any of them. But if they go further than that, then yeah, we could see Kaichi, or Kate Sif as it's spelt and how a lot of people call it. We could see Sid, and we could see Vincent. It's just, that's a huge we'll see on that part of where we'll see more of the main cast. It will be strange if they don't, if I'm honest. Wait until the 3rd part before we actually get to see the entirety of the original crew would feel kind of odd. Like, I got it with part 1 because you still have a full team of, 5 by the end of this, with just one of them only being a guest member that you can't directly play as. And then you get a glimmer or like a tease of the 6th one that will come in part 2 through the DLC. So you get a little bit of an idea of what to expect in the future. And if part 2 does end short, or like I say end short, it can end wherever it wants, and I'm sure it will still be a fully fleshed out thing. I just really want it to go all the way to the end of disc 1 at least of the original game. I think the open world stuff and the way that they handle the Whispers of Fate and the way things going, they could cover a lot more ground and just make Junon basically the Wall Market chapter of the next game instead of the end point of the next game, you know? Like, they could make that one giant chapter where you're doing everything there instead of, you know, it takes like 6 chapters and it's like the wrap-up point of the game and we have another final dungeon-esque thing in there and all the other stuff. Like, I don't think they need to do that for part 2. I think part 2 can be a lot more smooth sailing and have a lot less, like, brand spanking new things that expand on things. Obviously, they'll still do it here and there. Like, I'm expecting Fort Condor to be expanded upon and be like a more of its own thing instead of this optional little side thing you can do. I'm expecting Yuffie's actual village in Wutai to become more plot relevant instead of just being a side quest thing like it was in the original. I'm expecting a lot of things to become a lot more like main path. I'm expecting when the team actually meet Yuffie, that to be a lot more focused, because in the original game you bump into her as a random encounter in one of the forests, and that's just kind of it. And she joins the party and, oh well, she's there now. You're like, oh okay. Because that was the strange thing with 7. And it's not a strange thing, it's something that was kind of universal of the series up until that point, is that there were Final Fantasy games with optional party members. 6 being the most infamous. About half of that game's party is optional in the first half of the game, and you can genuinely go fight the final boss with like 3 or 4 members out of like the 15 of them that were in the game total. I think it's actually 12, I say that. It's either 11 or 12 characters total, but you can go in with very little of them, including, oh, I don't know, the main actual character of the game. You can go fight the final boss without Terra. Like, there's a lot of that in 6, and so 7 kind of carried over the DNA of that originally by having Yuffie and Vincent both be optional party members. You had to go out of your way to get... Vincent you had to go pretty out of your way to get, because you had to solve a puzzle that wouldn't have been clear on your first run. Especially if you played it like most people did when they were kids. You get to that puzzle and you have no idea what on earth it's talking about, and eventually, like most kids, you just kind of say, no, screw it, I'll come back to it, and you leave, and so you never get Vincent. But when you do figure it out, it leads from one thing to another that eventually leads to Vincent. And I'm really hoping that they'll do the same with Vince as they've done with Yuffie, or I expect they'll do with Yuffie, and make Vince a actual main party member with like fleshed out story beats instead of just an optional thing you have to go find. Because Vincent has a lot of relevance as well. He has, without spoiling anything for the original game if you haven't played it, he has quite the extensive history with Hojo. And so I think with Hojo's significance being pushed to the front line a lot more in this game, as we'll see because we're going through Hojo's bullshit here with the drum, I think it makes sense to make sure Vincent is a mainstay party member. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're going to do that anyway, because otherwise, like, if you never got him, you'll go to part 3 and he suddenly won't be, like, you suddenly have to be there, and you're like, huh? But anyway, changing subject slightly, we just picked up the Twin Stinger, Cloud's final weapon, and what gives him, in my opinion, probably the best ability in the game, the counter stance. The way it works is that when you use it, it will spend the 1 ATB, and Cloud will hold a stance for about 2 seconds, give or take. If he's attacked or hurt by literally anything during that time, he will use a counter attack, which is a far more powerful version than the Punisher attack. It will do 3 hits and then explode, the explosion doing a shit ton of damage, even in hard mode. It is an extremely effective skill if you're prepared to get the timing for it, because obviously you have to have the ATB and you have to predict the attack coming. And because of the explosion effect, if there's a lot of enemies close by to one another, the 3 slices and then the explosion will catch several enemies, so it's even more viable. In hard mode, it will demolish Roach, it will demolish that first fight with Reno in the church. If you get the timing for it and, you know, don't get grabbed, it will affect Rude. Unlike Punisher, it can punish and counter magic. It can counter pretty much everything except grabs. Whilst the actual, like, Punisher stance counter only counters physical attacks. So you can use counter stance, like, it will deflect a bullet. Like, if a stray bullet hits you, it will activate Cloud's counter stance. It's an amazing skill to have. The only downside is that it's attached to a weapon that's a lot shorter than the rest, and in my opinion just isn't nice. I don't really like the aesthetic of this weapon compared to all the other weapons, including the bat in this game. I just think this weapon looks kind of subpar. So almost as soon as, even though it's got 6 materia slots, as soon as I get counter stance, I'm swapping back to the Mithril Saber, and then eventually it'll be the Buster Sword for the finale.
We got him.
Yeah, keep it up, y'all.
Don't move an inch.
But the main gimmick of the drum is that because the game doesn't give you free access to pick what party members you want to use outside of Coliseum fights, they made it so all 4 characters that are playable have use in this chapter by making them be divided into 2 teams of 2. So Tifa and Aerith are going to be on a team for the major majority of this chapter and the entirety of the drum, whilst Cloud and Barrett are going to be on the other team. It's actually the boys team and the girls team. Whilst Red 13, with his increased agility and a few other bits and pieces, will eventually be alternating between the 2 teams. Like, he'll start with Cloud and Barrett, but later on he'll end up with Tifa and Aerith. But unfortunately, the 5 of us here, it's not just the 5 of us, of course it's not. We're being watched by Hojo. This is Hojo's, like, personal domain, the drum. So of course he's going to be enjoying our stay here and use us for all of his experiments. The drum in its entirety, I know like Midgar in its entirety is kind of a curious piece of sci-fi fiction as to how it was built and how it was structured and how it works. But my goodness, how did the drum come to be? How did this place come to be? I'm more curious about that. Because this place is gargantuan. It's loads of little mini facilities. Like, it goes way down to like all those pods that we saw. And there's enemies wandering around on their own, let loose. Like, what led it to this situation? That this mega tower has become this, like, hive, almost. Like, how dangerous is Hojo? And to be fair, you should already be aware of how dangerous Hojo actually is, but the drum really helps emphasize that Hojo's a piece of work. There's a reason why I class him as one of the main villains of the story. But when the game gives you the option to first swap parties, you should do it, because Tifa and Aerith are the only ones that can progress right now. And they do it deliberately, so no matter what, you have to come touch this phone to be introduced to the concept to begin with. So, like, Cloud and Barrett can't advance full stop, so now it becomes up to Tifa and Aerith's party, with Tifa leading. So, your materia slots need to be accommodating for all 4 characters. Don't just fall into the trap of only worrying about the characters you're currently playing as and swapping things over. There will be situations later on where it will snap between both parties without giving you the breathing room in between. So you need to be able to have all 4 members effectively capable of fighting. So go through your materia and organize it so all 4 party members have things to work with so they can all fight. Aerith still needs to max out her the luxurious shield, like the flower shield thing she got from the weapon we took from Eligor, because we only got 1 fight to use it in.
Let's look around. Gotcha.
So we never got to max it out, and you're gonna see that because it's been a while, I forget I need to max that out. And so I don't immediately prioritize it, but when I do, I go, oh yeah, right, that thing. To discover the annoying fact that I was 1 lone connection away from learning it. If 1 extra stray attack during that fight against the Whispers, way back when in chapter, what was it, 12? If 1 stray attack extra had gone Aerith's way and hit the shield as Aerith runs into a fence, we would have had that maxed out then and there. But because we've pulled this lever, these pods have come out not just on our level but on Cloud's level too. So now Tifa and Aerith could proceed, get this, but they can't go any further right this second. The only other access point is a closed door. It's over here. The door number, which you want to make sure you glance at the door number as you go. Like, just make a note of them because it'll make it easier. Past me knows what it is, but present me can't remember. I think I actually spin the camera to glance at it.
But it's locked and we can't get it open.
I hope. Or do I just not? Okay, no, the game does it for you. Yeah. Number 3. Remember number 3. The only way we're opening that door is by pulling the switch to the same number, which Cloud and Barrett can now reach because they're down there. And we opened up the pods so they can travel across, which will lead them to a bridge there. They can pull lever 3, to which then will let Tifa and Aerith proceed onwards. They'll reach the next section, pull another lever that allows Cloud and Barrett to move on. You get the idea. That's the entirety of the drum. It's alternating between the 2 parties to eventually let each side tiptoe forward. And to be honest, as someone who's been very slowly but surely working his way through Mary Skelter Finale, this gimmick's lost its charm to me, because Mary Skelter Finale's entire game is built around that. Because the game starts with like all 15 odd characters split into 6 parties, and each one, when they proceed so far, will eventually unlock something or get a key to get put into a shaft to get to another party so they can proceed. So you're alternating between all 6. Eventually they group up to 3 big groups, but it still becomes the same formula for the rest of the game. And it's like, I've got as far as like the Salvation Tower, which I think is like the second to last dungeon, and I'm so tired of it. Like, the gimmick's fun, and they find creative new ways, but alternating between the 3 teams and making every dungeon take a lifetime is really making Mary Skeleton Finale kind of drag for me. Which is a shame, because I liked the first game. I've mentioned before that I don't love it, and if it ever got re-released, I wouldn't be too quick to let's play it. But I did enjoy it, and I did get the platinum for it, so I clearly enjoyed it enough to go to put the effort in. But going through Mary Skeleton Finale, it's like, God, this game's exhausting. Like, it genuinely is. And I think what doesn't help, and I know this is entirely like personal to your playthrough, but I've got really good shit on Jack's party. Like, Jack's party, the entire team of 5 that you have is really good. Like, it's some of the better members of the older games anyway. And so it's like, wow, this is brilliant. And the new characters in there, in the form of, you know, Mary and Charlotte, are really good as well. Like, they're really like effective in what they can do, especially Mary with the right magic setups and right blood magic shit. Like, she's devastating. Then you go to Clara's team, and it's like, it's still pretty good, not as good, but it's still pretty good. And I'm finding it that like everywhere I go, everything's slightly harder than it is with Jack's team. Like, Jack's team, I kind of breeze through everything, and it's kind of almost like I'm running on easy mode. Actually, I say that I've game overed a lot of times, so I wouldn't say easy mode. I'd say more like normal mode. Well, Clara's team is hard mode, because everything's just a little bit more awkward, because there's definitely strong members in the team, but it's not quite to the same extent. They're not quite as effective as a whole, so you have to kind of compromise a lot of things. And then finally is Toe's team, and I don't know if I'm missing something or something, but Toe's team is like, if Clara's is hard mode, Toe's is like European extreme. It is a fucking nightmare to get anywhere with that team. They're so terrible, and no matter what I give them and what I do, it's like, oh, the magic user of the team, the other 2 teams' magic users have instant cast powerful group-wide magic. Thumbelina in Toe's team doesn't. All of her magic is chance-based, meaning you use it, and when it's their next turn, the spell goes off, and that includes healing. So the team feels constantly disadvantaged, and it feels like I'm item spamming more than I am actually healing. But then whatever equipment I put on it is either their attacking stats are way too low, but their defense is decent enough to survive, or their attack stat is vaguely close to what Jack's team and Clara's team does naturally, but their defense is so abysmal they get one-shotted. And none of them have a good amount of health or SP or magic points. Well, I can't remember if it's MP or SP in that game. So, I'm constantly having to use like SP restorative items, but they're the only team that don't get SP restorative items from doing social stuff, because outside of combat you can give your allies items and give them like treats and whatnot to like better your relational standings, and eventually you unlock basically social links with them. But every time you give them something, they give you something back. And I don't know if I'm missing something, or if it's like particular items give certain results, but Toe's team is the only one where they don't give me SP items when I give them stuff. The other 2 teams do. And so SP, keeping on top of it's never a problem with the other teams, but with Toe's team, it's like a state of an emergency a lot of the time, especially when enemies are very physical resistant, and I don't have many group-wide physical attacks. The only ones I do are based off passives, where it's like a passive effect where it says sometimes normal attack will hit group. Also, there's me getting the Lustrous Shield. Literally, like I said, 1 more use was all it took and I got it. But yeah, so I'll get through Mary Skeleton Finale eventually, and I plan to platinum it. The only trophy that's going to be annoying is, in the games, there's something called Blood Devolution, where you basically can de-level yourself. Because depending on what class you've got on, because you have different job classes, similar to like Final Fantasy 3 and 5, see, it relates, where you can change your classes and it gives them different skills and different movesets and affects their stats. When you level up, what job you're assigned to will affect what stats go up. If you perform a blood devolution, it's solely so you can reset that, so you can get your stats to go a different way. It's something that the whole trilogy highly recommends you do, but I never do. Because there's a trophy that says get to level 80 and then perform a blood devolution, and it's in the original and it's in Finale. So I just grind out in post-game until I get it, save, Blood Devolution, get the trophy, load my saves, get my levels back. Because performing a level 80 Blood Devolution, going straight from level 80 to level 1 again, that's brutal. I know the reason why they don't mind you doing it is because the experience requirement to re-level up is nowhere near as high, so you'll level up quickly. So you can just course correct your stats and it won't take too much grinding. But the thing is, in the first 2 games, they were nowhere near as hard. Like, the first game had some difficult moments in early game where you didn't have as many party members, but once you got your full party or started getting enough to have a full team go, the game became extremely manageable all the way to the end. Even some of the late game bosses really didn't give me that much trouble. And the post game dungeon, I critiqued. I can't remember if I ever said it in a video, but I critiqued that the post game dungeon, although it was a worthy final challenge, it's like an extra thing after the final boss, it was hellishly way too long. 100 by 100 meter long floors, or big floors, and it's a maze, and there's like 4 or 5 floors in a row. Fuck that, it took a lifetime. It was so boring. It's a 100 by 100 meter maze. Like, it just dragged it out. And as far as I'm aware, the sequels don't... I can't remember from Mary Skelter 2, because I never actually... Like, I've seen the true ending and I know what happens, but I never finished Mary Skelter 2. The nature of not owning a Switch, I could only play it when I'm around with friends, or play the Japanese version, because only the Japanese version was released on PS4. Both of which I've tried, and both of which are just too awkward for me to really press on, so I watched a lot of it online instead. So I don't actually know if there's post-game dungeon in it. But Mary Skelter Finale also recaps the first 2 quite a lot, so it's not too bad in that sense.
We'll make it quick.
But in Mary Skelter Finale, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have one. From what I've read online, because I wanted to make sure to read if I have to worry about grinding for the Blood Devolution trophy or not. And the game just says, yeah, grind out the final dungeon. I'm like, oh, okay, so you can't just not worry about it and get it in post. Because that's what happened in the original. In the original, I hit level 99 because of the post-game dungeon. And I entered it at like level 60. Because the post-game dungeon is just that stupendously long and you're there for like half an eternity. And your only reward for doing it is a tease for what's to come. It's actually a tease for the beginning of Mary Skelter Finale, I believe. And I am aware of the... And maybe this will kind of give away why I'm kind of an on-again, off-again Mary Skelter person. Like, I'm not a biggest fan of it, because I feel like it gets a little too much for its own good. You have to get the true ending on Mary Skelter 2 to unlock the ability to get specific items in Mary Skelter 1 that leads to the actual true ending of that game. So I've got the true ending that doesn't include Mary Skelter 2 in that, and I know what happens. Basically, if you get the true ending in Mary Skelter 1 after getting the true ending in Mary Skelter 2, you get an extended ending which basically links the dots between the first game and the second, because the second game's a prequel, and there's characters in it that the first game's party know that they never acknowledge in the original. And so this the true ending is just them kind of actively acknowledging, oh yeah, they do know them. They just, because of the nature of the jail tower they're in, which is basically like this living dungeon that they're in, it wipes their memories. And so their memories were only developed of what they know from the dungeon once they were in there. So because they were separated from the other members, because they were separated from Otsu and Little Mermaid, yes, this are the Mary Skelter characters' names. It's also another, like, tied into the story thing of them getting a little bit carried away. So they have that tie-in ending of them kind of rendezvousing and fighting together and remembering why they fought for. So when Mary Skelter Finale starts and all of them are together, both the 1 and 2 party, it makes sense. It doesn't just kind of come out of the blue. Even though I do feel like they could have just wrapped it around by just having Mary Skelter Finale starts with them rendezvousing and kind of going, oh, I know you guys, and they like connect the dots, and then they could use it as an excuse to recap in the game the events of some of the first and second. Because Finale, without the extras menu on the main menu, Finale throws you straight in with zero context. So if you haven't played the first two, you don't have a goddamn clue what's going on. And it doesn't bother explaining literally anything. There are still a couple things like much later in the game that they'd mention and I'd go, oh, okay, I didn't realise that. Like, Otsu and I think it's Jack are being related. You don't have a reason to know that. If they don't mention that in any kind of recap, if they just mention like one-off line dialogue, and you go, oh, okay. Well, I think it's those two that are related. Otsu might be related with someone else, but I think that's the two that are related. Meanwhile, Otsu and Little Mermaid are like a married couple, and it's like the most charming thing in the game because they're an actual couple and not a Americanized sitcom couple that you see in everything. You know what I mean? Where it's like they secretly hate each other, and it's like it's the most unrealistic and toxic fucking thing in the planet, and they try and sell it to you like it's real life. Every relationship is like this. Meanwhile, Otsu and Little Mermaid just fucking love each other, and that's the bottom line. They genuinely enjoy each other's company and married each other because they love each other and wanted to make it a symbol of themselves, sort of thing. Also, I must have missed it talking about Mary Skelter, but we picked up Aerith's final weapon as well, which gives her ATB ward, which is one of her best skills in the game as well, because as long as you're in the vicinity of it, you can get free ATB charges as you fight. And every time you do, it will give a proficiency bonus, so you'll build it up pretty quick as well. If you just keep on using ATB whilst you're in the vicinity, you'll get free ATB here and there. It will just kind of pop every now and then, and you'll get an ATB bar. But genuinely, Otsu and Little Mermaid, it's the same reason why I love Mai and Rotti in Death End Request 2. Because their relationship is genuine. The actual relationships where the couples, love each other exist. And it always annoys me that like a lot of American media, it's not just sitcoms, it's a lot of, and it's not just American to be fair, it's a lot of, it's just they're the biggest offender, but it's a lot of that sort of stuff that it genuinely annoys me. It's like, no, I've been in relationships where that's bullshit. I know people who are in relationships that know that's bullshit, where they genuinely are just best buddy soulmates that love everything about each other, never bicker about anything unless it's like playful banter, and genuinely adore the time they get to spend with each other like it's their first date every day. And it's not unrealistic, no matter what like these kind of TV shows and things like to try and convince you otherwise. It's not unrealistic at all. It's actually very accurate to, be happy with someone you love. Funny that. And it's just, it's just an odd thing. But it's something that I really enjoy in Mary Skelter. That those two's relationship is really sweet. It's really charming. There is no arguing. There is no bickering. It's a genuine, pure love. And even after they're married, as Aerith, get the fuck out of the... Even after marriage, they're still... Like, they still call each other prince and princess, for God's sake. And it's really cute. And like Otsu like commits herself to trying to make herself as strong as possible and better herself in as many ways as she can, solely so she can continue to be this strong pillar of support for Little Mermaid whenever she needs it. Meanwhile Little Mermaid is always very leaning, while at the same time always prepared to be the mental support, because Otsu has gone through a lot of mental troubles, whilst Little Mermaid isn't the most physically strong. And so Otsu becomes the physical strength for both of them, whilst Little Mermaid becomes the mental strength for both of them, and they balance it out with each other to comfort each other when needed, to make sure both of them can stay as strong as they need to be in every sense. And it's like I say, it's just really sweet. It's nice to see it. It's a constant compliment to Idea Factory, GJRPG, and basically every game published under Compile Hearts writing, is that it's always consistently really charming. The actual writing of the stories might not always be great, but the character writing is always really charming. And Mary Skelter Finale is no exception. I love the writing of the characters and the bouncing relationships they have. I love the fact that Toe and Red kind of sort of hate each other, but respect each other enough because they're both leaders in their own right. But they're both way too stubborn and like deep-rooted in how they think and how they believe to actually kind of talk to each other about that. Because Toe's 100% focused on, I need to find my wife, and Red is 100% focused on, we need to find the others. And they clash, even though they both need to continue exploring where they are to try and hopefully find the other groups and find other people. They're so indifferent and so bickery, like sibling rivalry, that it becomes really charming in its own way, right? Also, what I do here, we only need to press on forward, but I backtrack because I went the right way first. I went to go the wrong way first to try and get loot. So I like U-turn and go get this, and then eventually I just cut back when we get there to save you having to watch me run all the way there as well. Because there's an item way back in this corner here that I wanted to just get before I forgot it. It's only a bottle of ether, but I just remembered that chest being there. So then afterwards I start running back and healing up a little bit, and cut to when I'm back where we just were to pull the lever. Get them. Oh, we've got an MP of the Marco Shard. Nice. And this chapter, yeah, this chapter, you've got to be wearing your resources in hard mode because it's all 4 party members. There isn't going to be a case of someone gets traded out later on, so you don't have to worry about MP too much because you're about to get someone with full MP. No, everyone's going to be involved, and the boss fight at the end of the drum section includes both parties because the boss retreats halfway through the fight away from one party and ends up in the vicinity of the other. So the boss fight requires all 4 members, just not directly at the same time kind of thing. And I wish I'd say that after that fight is when the chapter ends, but it doesn't. As I said, this chapter is the other chapter I genuinely feel should have been split in 2. And I think once you leave the drum, this chapter should end, but it doesn't. This chapter, without spoiling the details, will continue onwards until we actually reach the roof to see what happens there. And will continue even after the events of the roof ends until we are finally off the roof in its entirety, one way or another. And that results in, because the roof, it means going past President Shinra's actual office. It's not like we're just going to be able to stroll on by with nothing happening. We're going to have extra boss fights, we're going to have extra major events and encounters after we leave the drum. But you're already exhausted by doing this whole dungeon, MP-wise. You already used everything up. Well, hopefully you didn't use everything up because you have a little bit of sense to try and hold things back, even with the boss fight. But it's so pushing in that sense. And we're not even, that's not even the only major fight in the drum. There's a mini-boss later on, where it's not too hard and it's not too much going on, but the fight can become quite overwhelming if you're not using magic. But, limited magic with hard mode. But anyway, as you proceed onwards, I feel like it's only here to help drag out the drum. Because it does feel like they wanted this to kind of be not too much padding, but some padding, while also, being the great finale. We've got a little bit of a gauntlet here, where we're going to just go through different rooms fighting enemies. And it's going to be identical rooms back to back, just different enemies within them. And to jump the gun, Intergrade does it as well. And it is something that I kind of critique with Intergrade, because it feels like Intergrade... Chapter 1 is a very healthy length with a lot of healthy content, but Chapter 2, it feels like they only had a very few things they wanted to cover, but they wanted the chapter to be as long as Chapter 1. And so there's a lot of gauntlet-y stuff and a lot of stuff that didn't really need to be there, but they kind of chuck it in anyway. But I'll let that go. It is what it is. We've got Counter-Strike maxed out, and so I start going through my weapons, and I'm like, I want to use the Buster Sword, but the Buster Sword still only has 4 materia slots right now. As I've said before, by the end of hard mode, if you've got all the art books, you will have 6 materia slots on almost every single weapon in the game. So I start going through my stuff and go, okay, what materia do I not mind giving up that I can swap on to the very end to kind of get rid of, knowing that I will lose it when I swap up to the Mithril Saber. See, so I do that and I keep the materia, I keep binding because I want sleep. Even though I've already got sleep available to me, I want it for later, so I keep it on so I don't forget, basically. So I don't trust me. When I'm mid-recording, I don't trust myself to remember absolutely everything. Even though on a casual playthrough where I'm not recording, I would. It was the same with Nocturne, where I'd go through an entire dungeon and make notes. I 99% of the time knew exactly where I was going. It was just the lack of trust to not 100% know to the nail what I needed to do that made it so I started making notes as I went through. But we can't harm Hojo or get to him, but he's sure as shit gonna make us do our and fulfill his experimental quota to learn more battle intel on us. So we're stuck with him for now. And that is genuinely the rule of thumb. We're going to go through another door, which will lead us round to another battle room. And after we'll go through another door, that will lead us to a third battle room, and then they finally do away with it. Here we pick up the Astral Cuff, which I believe is a 4 materia slot accessory. No, it's not. It's a 0. It's the opposite. It's like the Iron Maiden, but magic based. Where the Iron Maiden is like super defense buff, the Astral Cuff is super magic defense, but no materia. I'm thinking of something else entirely. Also, that was a nice like chunk of MP. Thanks, game. That was appreciated. But here, when we enter the room, the door always closes, so you get an idea of, oh, maybe that front door, if we're quick enough or can set something up, we can squeeze on through and not have to worry about this. Which is what I'm kind of going for. And it's what the game kind of goes for. They want you to think that. Although this moth unit, if you wanted to turn off the razors around it, you need to hit it with Thundara, because otherwise it will just stay here forever. And the reason why I'm spamming counter stance is because I want the thing to get near me, because its slight grazing little damage would still count for, it will still count for the counter strike. But it is me trying to get the Thunder on to get it to remove the blade. But a Thundaga is what will get rid of it in very quickly. After a while, it will get rid of it on its own, which is what happened here. But as I said, you can interrupt it early, you just need to hit it hard enough. And eventually it will try and bring it out again. But you see, that time, because of the impact of the blast, I managed to interrupt it immediately so it didn't get to do it. And we thankfully defeat the Moth unit before it gets a chance to try anything else, because of one good swing of the Infinity's Edge. I like how Barrett tries to mock here and Hojo's like, I want you to destroy them, because then I get more combat data. Because Hojo only sees us as pieces of his experiment, and nothing more. In his idea, it's like, well, if you either get a satisfying amount of data that he can use for future things that cause more problems, or we die, he gets Aerith back, so nothing's lost. And if anything, with how he's talking about how he wants to psychologically torture Aerith into submission, if we died here, he would absolutely just use that. He already tried to with the whole thing with her mother.
Look, now's our chance to kill the bastard. Time for you to pay the piper.
They never learn.
Commencing test. All personnel must evacuate area. Commencing test.
Be a good boy and keep the other cats company.
Shit, looks like Red might need our help up there.
And as the music kicks off, we get introduced to, in my opinion, the worst fucking enemy in this game. I hate these things. I genuinely despise these things. I think they're the worst enemy in the game, because all they do is fucking run. The way they're supposed to work is that if you do enough damage to them, they'll malfunction. When they malfunction, they become far more aggressive, like a berserker form, but they won't fuck off immediately like that. Like, they will actually hang around. And it's just, getting them to that stage without them, you know, immediately running makes them a pain in the ass. And you see, I try and assess them a bunch of times, but the very frame they start their animation of trying to zip down back into the hole, their hitbox vanishes, so you can't do it anymore. Additionally, the bastards will also cast stop a bunch to try and hold you in place. When they cast stop on you, they will then, you know, as you can see, start battering the shit out of you to try and make the most of it. So Cloud's in danger until that stop ends. But your general gist is that you're trying to get damage in. But your best bet is usually magic. But magic requires charge time. Charge time that might get wasted because, like I said, the very frame they go to hop in back into the hole, the whack-a-mole is failed. Their hitbox completely turns off, so you can't harm them. So it will just be a wasted spell because it will hit thin air, and it won't auto-target onto something else because the game will just treat it as there's nothing there. And as you can see, I'm chasing this fucker everywhere, and it just, there we go. So I'm like, for fuck's sake. I'm chasing the exact same one. I'm making sure it's version C to try and divide and conquer a little, and it just keeps on buggering off. I'm like, so I really don't like these things. So I try and cast stop. Stop doesn't last long on these things. They're not immune to it, but it really doesn't give you much time. It's more, they have a resistance, so it will not last long. On some enemies, it will last half a lifetime. There's a boss later on where it's like part of the strategy. But as it stands right now, no, these guys will keep on fighting. It's like, come on, you're so nearly there. You don't need to stagger them to make them malfunction. No, it's just putting on the pain. And it's like, there, we finally fucking got it. And that's not the mini-boss. They're a normal enemy. We're going to fight more of them later on, so, The mini-boss was actually the thing that we saw hold Red 13 in place. We're going to be fighting that later on as well.
Get out of here! What was that thing?
Where's Hojo?
Sorry, he got away.
Forget about him for now.
But now we've got the whole party of 3 back together, we can start pursuing Hojo again. If you turn around and go back through these doors, you can go back through the other battle halls we were in to pick up some stuff, and when you turn back you'll probably spot the chest that's kind of like tucked away in the corner. See, there it is. And I was praying that this chest was all, and it's not. I was like, if that chest is the all materia, then thank God I haven't missed it in chapter 14. If it's not, I've absolutely missed it in chapter 14, and it was in chapter 14 somewhere. So that for me was the confirmation that I missed the all materia. As I said, it is a shame, but it is what it is. I make the most of what I've got, and the magnify materia, although it's range limited, does enough to make up for it. Here's the 4-piece materia slot I was thinking of from before. The chain. And you should absolutely be using it. The fact that it's got 2-piece chain, you should absolutely be making it so you're resistant to something. There are blue materials that make you resistant to debuffs. So use that as well. I don't, but it's very much especially for hard mode. Especially for hard mode. So you're not having to worry about fixing status conditions all the time and getting pummeled, and so having to waste more healing magics to fix it. Make yourself as resistant to as many status conditions that you find problematic as possible. Make it so you can't be put to sleep and you can't be stopped. And you should be fine. But speaking of that mini-boss, we're actually here. The reason why I say it's a mini-boss and not an actual boss is because it only has 2 phases. And it has very little health. You'll wipe it out in just a few minutes flat. It's actually kind of refreshing compared to some of the other boss fights we fought as of late that take forever. That this thing really doesn't have much. Phase 1 is just pummel it. Phase 2 is it duplicates itself, find the real one, pummel it, it dies. Like genuinely, this brain pod. The only thing that's a real hazard with it is that it can cast status conditions on you. So that chain bangle you just got, you know, might be getting some use here. So get haste on everyone, and then start pummeling. And as you can see by Barret getting a lot of weak symbols appear when it hits it, it's weak to electricity. So you don't even really need to scan it, you can just start working on it. And look, it's already a third down. It's over halfway down. The moment you hit halfway, like I said, it goes into phase 2. It makes a forced stun on everyone, so you don't worry about it. Like, you literally cannot do anything in this moment. Taunts you and then duplicates itself. Only one of these versions are real, but you might as well kill all of them. If you let yourself get beat up, one ascension will fuck up all of them. Genuinely, if you get Cloud's limit break, one ascension will end the fight, pretty much. If you don't lock on and just let it go loose and go wild, the ascension will end this fight so lickety-split, it's kind of baffling. And it's likely to actually happen, and in hard mode it's what I relied on, because they will spam stop a lot, hold you in place, and then wail on you, so you will build up limit break meter pretty damn quickly because of it. So if you just let it happen a little, obviously don't go ridiculous with it, because you need to worry about the future, you need to worry about the fact that you're going to need to be healing off the damage you get. But you can see, like, Cloud went from 0 limit to, like, he's about a third of the way up now. And if you have anything that builds up builds up limit quicker, you can make even more use out of it. But if you don't want to go that route, the other option I'd suggest is spam counter stance, because you're likely to catch several CODs per use. Because the limit's full. So I Ascension, problem is that I started it with a lock on, so even after this enemy dies, he keeps on it. But if you're not locked on, he will jump. He will jump to the next brain pod, and you can wipe out like 3 or 4 of them in one go. Because right here, the fight's over, it's dead. And that's why I consider it a mini-boss and not a major boss. There's no big finale cutscene of it dying and exploding in a bit of pieces. It just dies like it's a basic enemy afterwards, and you go, oh, okay. So I use a Cura, so it's a full heal guaranteed. And so with Barret, you might be more tempted to use Cura, but with Aerith, never use Cura, because her magic stat is so high that Cura will always be enough. And that puts us, I want to say about 2/3 of the way through the drum. We've still got a large chunk to go yet before we're finished, but we're going to be wrapping it up in the next video.
I'll let Tifa and Aerith. So, although it's a little early, we've still got about 30 seconds left. I know I've rambled on a lot about Mary Skelter for a lot of it, but I genuinely enjoy that game for what it is. I just find the dungeon crawling and team altering gimmick of it kind of tiring.
What do you know?
And I might do a Let's Play of it at some point, just probably not anytime soon, because that game is extremely grindy and dungeon crawly, and trying to make that interesting is not so easy. But we'll see, that's for future me to worry about if I decide to do it. But next time on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, we'll continue our efforts to try and get out of the drum and rendezvous with the other party, so we can continue working our way to the roof to catch up with Avalanche to get a ride out of here. But until then, you guys take care now. Peace.